On a warm afternoon when the sky looked calm and ordinary, something was quietly beginning that no one could see coming. In a busy part of the city, life moved fast, like it always did. Cars rushed by, people walked quickly with tired faces, and horns kept filling the air with noise. In the middle of all this, a young man stood at a bus stop, looking down at his phone, not knowing that one small moment was about to change his life. He was not rich. He was not famous. He was just an ordinary person trying to make it through each day. His clothes were simple, his shoes a little worn out, and his shoulders carried the silent weight of responsibilities. He worked long hours and barely complained. He was the kind of person people rarely noticed. A few steps away, a young woman stood quietly, holding a small bag in her hands. Her eyes looked tired, but there was a calm strength in the way she stood. Life had never been easy for her. She had learned to stay quiet, to stay patient, and to keep moving forward no matter what. The bus was late that day. The air felt heavy, and everyone around looked annoyed. People moved around, some checking their watches, others talking loudly on their phones. The young man looked up, accidentally locking eyes with the young woman for one short second. They both looked away quickly. It didn't feel special. It didn't feel important. It felt like nothing. But life has a strange way of hiding important moments inside normal days. The bus finally arrived, and people rushed inside. The young man and the young woman ended up standing close to each other. The bus was crowded. There was barely space to breathe. The road was bumpy, and the bus moved in jerks. She almost lost balance when the bus slowed down suddenly. Without thinking, the young man gently moved his hand forward to help her steady herself. He didn't touch her. He only created space so she wouldn't fall. She noticed his small kindness. Their eyes met again, this time for a second longer than before. "Thank you," she said softly. He simply nodded. He wasn't used to talking much with strangers. They didn't speak again during the ride. They got off at different stops. Life went on. The next day, without planning it, they met again at the same bus stop. This time, it felt a little less like nothing. Not because of words, but because of awareness. They noticed each other. He saw that she always stood a little to the side, not wanting to disturb anyone. She noticed that he always checked the same old phone, as if waiting for something that never came. Still neither of them spoke. Days passed. Weeks passed. And somehow, their timing stayed the same. Same bus stop, same hour. Same quiet distance between them. One evening, rain started falling suddenly. People ran for cover. The young woman stood under a small shelter, trying to protect herself with only her bag. The young man slowly stepped closer and held his umbrella slightly towards her side. Without saying anything, she hesitated for a second, then quietly stepped under it. Rain fell heavily. The sound of drops filled the air. "You don't have to," she said. "It's fine," he replied simply. That was their second real conversation. From that day, silence between them didn't feel awkward anymore. It felt comfortable. Sometimes they spoke about simple things. The weather, the traffic, the long bus rides. Slowly, those small talks started feeling important. They never asked deep questions. They never crossed limits. But they felt safe standing next to each other. One evening, the sun was starting to set. She was not at the bus stop. He noticed it immediately. He told himself it didn't matter. People come and go. Life keeps moving, but the next day, he looked for her again without realizing it. She wasn't there. A strange emptiness stayed in his chest. It surprised him. He wasn't the type to depend on people, but something about that quiet presence had become part of his routine. On the third day, he almost convinced himself that she had simply changed her time or route. That was when he saw her again, standing a little further away than usual. She looked tired. More tired than before? "Are you okay?" he asked, without thinking. She paused, then nodded slowly. "Just a long week." He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. Sometimes people don't need questions. They just need company. That day, the bus was more crowded than ever. People pushed. People shouted. The noise felt endless. But between all of that, they stood silently side by side. Like a small, calm space inside a loud storm, he started to feel something strange growing inside him. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't fantasy. It was comfort. It was peace. For the first time in a long time, he looked forward to waiting for a bus. One afternoon, she dropped something from her bag. Papers fell to the ground. He quickly bent down and helped her pick them up. "Thank you," she said again. This time, he smiled slightly. That small smile changed something. From that day onward, they started sharing little laughs. Not loud laughs, soft ones. The kind that only two people could hear. He learned that she worked hard and rarely complained. She learned that he carried silence not because he was cold, but because he had been hurt before in ways he never explained. They never spoke about love. They never spoke about feelings. But something invisible started growing between them. Something quiet. Something real. People around them still saw nothing. To them, they were just two strangers standing close. No one noticed the way their silences matched. No one noticed how they waited for each other's arrival without admitting it. One night, the city lights looked brighter. The air felt softer. She looked at him and said, "It's strange." "What?" He asked. "How you can feel comfortable with someone you barely know." He thought for a moment and said, "Maybe it's because sometimes the heart recognizes what the mind hasn't figured out yet." "Ah!" She looked surprised by his words. Then she smiled. That smile stayed with him long after they got off at their stops. That night, he lay down in his small room and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in years, his thoughts weren't heavy. They were quiet. He wasn't in love. Not yet. But he felt something had started. And somewhere in another quiet room across the city, she also sat quietly, thinking about a simple bus stop, a shared umbrella, and a calm voice that made noisy days feel silent. They still had no idea what was waiting for them. They also had no idea that their simple, unnoticed beginning would one day become a story people would talk about everywhere. But for now, it was just two ordinary people, standing at a bus stop, letting something beautiful begin without even realizing it. Life moved quietly for both of them after that small beginning. Days passed, and the bus stop became their silent meeting point. People came and went. The city continued its endless rush, but for them, those few minutes waiting for the bus started to feel like a small world of their own. They spoke little, but when they did, it felt natural. Words didn't need to be perfect. The conversations were simple. "Did you sleep well? It looks like rain today. I hope the bus isn't too crowded." Small things, ordinary things. But each word carried a warmth neither of them could explain. It was not a friendship yet. It was something quieter, something that made the day feel lighter. The young man began noticing her little habits. How she always tucked her hair behind her ear when it fell on her face. How she kept her bag tightly against her chest when the wind blew. How her eyes looked tired, yet they carried a calm strength. He began feeling an unusual curiosity, not the kind that tries to solve mysteries, but the kind that quietly observes and wants to understand. She, on the other hand, started noticing small things about him too. How he always wore the same faded jacket, even when the weather changed. How he had a small scar on his hand that he didn't talk about. How his eyes sometimes looked distant, like he was thinking about a place no one else could see. She didn't ask him anything about it, but she noticed, and the noticing itself started to matter. One afternoon, when the bus was delayed again, the young woman pulled out a small notebook from her bag. She opened it and began scribbling something quickly. He couldn't help but glance at it, curious but careful. He didn't want to stare. He was not the kind to pry, but he noticed the concentration on her face, the way her lips pressed together when she wrote, and the small smile that appeared when she looked at the page. "Are you writing a story?" he asked quietly. She looked up, startled, then smiled softly. "Something like that," she said. "It's just thoughts." He nodded and smiled back, and for a moment, silence returned. But it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt safe. It felt natural. Days turned into weeks. Their conversations grew slowly, like a flower opening petal by petal. They talked about work, about the city, about dreams they hadn't shared with anyone else. They talked about the small failures of the day, the things that went wrong, and the tiny victories that no one else noticed. She spoke about her favorite places in the city. He told her about the quiet spots he sometimes visited to think. Neither of them spoke about love. That word felt heavy, unnecessary. But they both began to feel it quietly, in the pauses, in the glances, in the way the other's presence made the day brighter. One evening, the sky was painted with orange and pink. The city felt softer than usual. He noticed her watching the sunset, her eyes following the colors across the horizon. Without thinking, he said, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" She turned to him and nodded. "Yes, I always like this time of day. It feels calm even when the city is loud." They stood side by side, watching the sky. No one else mattered. No cars, no horns, no rushing crowd. Just the quiet moment between two people who had started to matter to each other without realizing it. Then came the day, when the young woman had to leave the city for a few weeks. It was sudden. Family matters. She didn't want to go, but she had no choice. The young man felt a strange emptiness when he heard the news. He didn't realize how much those small daily meetings had become part of his life until he knew they would stop, before she left. They met at the usual bus stop. The young man wanted to say something more, but words felt inadequate. So he simply offered her a small smile and said, "Take care of yourself." She looked at him, her eyes softening. "I will. And thank you for everything." It was a small goodbye, quiet and simple, but it carried weight. During the weeks she was gone, he felt her absence in ways he didn't understand at first. The bus rides felt longer, the city louder, the days emptier. He realized that what had started as small conversations and shared silences had quietly become important. He missed her presence. He missed the calm she brought to ordinary moments. He missed the tiny smiles, the soft words, the quiet understanding that needed no explanation. She, too, felt the absence. While she was away, she kept thinking about the young man, about the small gestures, the soft conversations, the moments of quiet companionship that had grown into something she couldn't name. She didn't tell anyone, not even herself, but she realized that his presence had become a comfort, part of her daily rhythm. When she finally returned, the young man waited at the usual bus stop. His heart beat a little faster when he saw her walking toward him. She noticed him too, and a small smile appeared on her face. It wasn't a dramatic reunion. No words were shouted. No hands were grabbed. Just a quiet acknowledgement that they were both back in the same place again. "Welcome back," he said softly. "Thank you," she replied, smiling. "It feels good to be home." The days after her return felt lighter. Their conversations resumed as if no time had passed. But now there was something unspoken, something deeper. A mutual awareness that they mattered more to each other than they had admitted. Even to themselves, one rainy afternoon, the bus was unusually empty. They found themselves sitting next to each other. The young man noticed she was shivering slightly from the cold. Without thinking, he moved his jacket a little closer so she could share it. She hesitated, then accepted it with a quiet thank you. For the first time, their physical proximity felt different. Not awkward, not forced, but natural. Like it had always been meant to be. Over the next few weeks, small gestures continued to grow. He began noticing when she looked tired and offered a simple, "Do you want to sit?" She began noticing when he looked lost in thought and asked softly, "Are you okay?" These small moments built trust. They built comfort. They built a quiet foundation that neither of them fully understood, but both felt. Friends who occasionally saw them together began to notice a change too. There was a softness, a calm, a subtle way of looking at each other that hinted at something more than friendship. One evening, while walking home together after the bus dropped them off near their neighborhoods, the young woman paused. She looked at him and said quietly, "I feel like I can tell you anything." He looked surprised but didn't reply immediately. Instead, he walked a little closer and said, "I feel the same. You don't have to explain. Just knowing you're here is enough." It was not a declaration of love. It was something quieter, something that mattered more. It was trust. It was care. It was understanding. Life continued in its ordinary rhythm. They went to work, returned home, and met again at the bus stop. But every ordinary day now carried a hidden significance. Every glance, every small conversation, every shared silence was a piece of something larger. Something neither of them could name yet, even in crowded streets. Noisy buses and busy city life, they began to create a small world for themselves. It was not perfect. It was not dramatic. It was human, real, and that made it remarkable one day. As the city lights began to flicker in the evening, the young woman said softly, "Do you ever wonder if people notice small moments like these?" He thought for a moment. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that we do. She smiled, not a big smile, just a quiet one. And in that moment, the ordinary bus stop, the crowded city, the noisy streets, all of it felt a little brighter. For the first time, they both realized that their connection was not about grand gestures or dramatic words. It was about presence, about noticing, about caring quietly, about being there even in silence. And while neither of them spoke about love yet, it was there. Not loud, not demanding, not even fully understood. But it was growing slowly. Like the roots of a tree that would one day bloom. It was a bond that felt natural, real, human. Something that would become impossible to ignore. Even if they tried, for now, it remained a quiet friendship that felt different from anything either of them had known. But in that quiet difference, something extraordinary was taking shape. One ordinary day at a time. And so, their story continued, quietly, patiently. Naturally, two ordinary people finding something that was anything but ordinary in the small, unnoticed moments of life. Life was starting to feel like a quiet rhythm for both of them. Days passed, and the ordinary moments they shared began to feel essential. The bus stop was no longer just a place to wait. It had become a small stage for something neither of them fully understood yet. Every glance, every word, every shared silence carried meaning that was growing slowly, invisibly, like the roots of a tree stretching beneath the surface. Then one day, everything began to change. It was a Monday morning, and the city was alive with noise as usual. People rushed through streets, the buses were late, and the air carried the smell of wet asphalt from a light rain the night before. The young man arrived at the bus stop a little earlier than usual, as he often did. But she was not there at first. He thought she was simply late. He waited, watching the familiar crowd of strangers moving past, but she didn't appear. Minutes passed. He started to feel a strange unease in his chest. It was not panic, not yet, just an unfamiliar tension. He had come to expect her presence, her quiet company, the small conversations that made ordinary mornings feel calm. And now, that comfort was missing. He checked his watch, then glanced at the road, hoping the bus would come quickly. But the bus was late, and she still hadn't arrived. A part of him wanted to call her, to ask if everything was okay, but another part held back. He didn't want to seem intrusive. He had learned to be patient, and yet impatience grew inside him without warning. When she finally arrived, she looked tired in a way he hadn't seen before. Her usual calm expression was replaced with something heavier, a quiet strain that seemed to pull at her shoulders. She didn't smile when she saw him, and for the first time, felt a distance between them that wasn't just physical. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice lacked its usual warmth. He wanted to ask more, but he didn't. Sometimes words weren't the solution. Sometimes being there silently was enough. He simply offered her a small smile, one meant to reassure without forcing conversation. The bus arrived, and they boarded together, but the usual comfort of sitting side by side, sharing small jokes and soft words, was gone. Silence filled the space, heavier than it had ever been. He noticed the way she avoided looking directly at him, how her fingers fiddled with the strap of her bag. He realized that something was wrong, but he didn't know what. Over the next few days, the unease continued. She seemed distracted, quiet in a different way, and the small, natural rhythm they had built together felt disrupted. He tried to talk to her, to ask simple questions, but her answers were short, polite, distant. He felt frustration building inside him, not at her, but at the situation. He didn't understand why this change had happened. He didn't know how to bridge the growing gap. It wasn't until the end of the week that he finally learned the reason. She had been dealing with a family problem, something serious that required her attention and energy. She had been trying to handle it alone, not wanting to burden anyone, not even him. She hadn't told him because she didn't know how, and because she wanted to protect the quiet space they shared from the chaos of her life. When she finally explained, her voice soft but strained, he felt a mix of relief and guilt. Relief that he finally understood, guilt that he hadn't noticed sooner. He realized how easy it was to assume that small silences meant nothing, that ordinary routines would continue unchanged. He had learned the hard way that life could disrupt even the calmest moments without warning. "I didn't want to bother you," she said, her eyes avoiding his. "You could never bother me," he replied softly. I didn't know. One wish I had known." For the first time, the invisible bond they had been nurturing faced a real test. It was no longer just about quiet smiles and small gestures. It was about trust, understanding, being willing to face difficult truths together. In the following days, he made an effort to be present in a different way. He didn't try to fix her problems. He didn't offer advice unless she asked. He simply listened, offered small reassurances, and stayed by her side when she needed it. Slowly, she began to open up, sharing bits of her worries and fears. One afternoon, as they sat on a bench waiting for the bus, she spoke quietly. "I didn't realize how much I needed someone to just be there," she said. He nodded, understanding more than words could convey. "I think sometimes we only notice what matters when it's almost gone," he said. She looked at him then, really looked, and for a moment the distance between them seemed to disappear. A small smile appeared, fragile but genuine. It wasn't the carefree smile of before, but it carried something deeper, relief, trust, and a quiet connection that had survived the disruption. The challenge of those days changed something in both of them. They realized that the bond they shared wasn't just about comfort or routine. It was about patience, understanding, and the willingness to stand by someone even when life became complicated. One rainy evening, the young man noticed her walking faster than usual, her bag heavy with papers. Without thinking, he stepped closer and offered his umbrella. She hesitated, then accepted, and for the first time, their hands brushed in a natural, unforced way. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The simple touch carried more meaning than words ever could. It was in these small, quiet moments that their connection deepened. Not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through ordinary acts of care. Sharing an umbrella, offering a jacket, listening without judgment, standing silently when words weren't enough. Even in the chaos of the city, they found a calm center in each other. People around them noticed nothing. Friends who occasionally saw them together assumed they were just casual acquaintances. But those who truly knew them, who had observed the subtle changes, could sense that something important was growing quietly, invisibly. One evening, as the sky turned soft shades of pink and orange, she paused while walking and said quietly, "I feel like I can trust you in ways I haven't trusted anyone before." He looked at her, surprised, but not startled. "I feel the same," he said. "It's not about solving everything. It's about being here, together, even when life is messy." She nodded, and in that moment, the ordinary streets, the noisy buses, the hurried strangers, all of it faded. They were in a world that only the two of them could understand. A quiet place built from trust, patience, and the willingness to be human together. Life, of course, didn't stop its usual rush. Work, responsibilities, and unexpected challenges continued to press in from all directions. But now, they faced these pressures differently. They were no longer two people merely crossing paths. They were partners in a small, quiet way, learning how to be present for each other without needing to fix everything. One day, as they sat waiting for the bus during a particularly long delay, she said softly. I didn't think I would find someone who understands without needing explanations. He smiled, a small, quiet smile. Sometimes understanding doesn't need words. Sometimes it just needs presence. In that presence, something deeper grew. Not love in the dramatic sense. Not a story that needed to be told to everyone. But a bond that was patient, human, and quietly resilient. For the first time, both of them realized that life would test this connection in ways they couldn't yet imagine. They also realized that the small, ordinary moments, the shared silences, the simple gestures, the quiet conversations were the ones that mattered most. And while they still didn't speak of love, they both felt it quietly, invisibly. In the way they waited for each other, cared for each other, and chose to remain present even when life made it difficult. It was a turning point. Not a dramatic one. Not marked by grand gestures or loud declarations. Just a quiet understanding that real connections could survive challenges if both people were willing to stay, to listen and to care. And in that quiet understanding, their story became something more than ordinary. It became real, human, impossible to ignore. The city moved on, as it always did. Buses continued to run late, streets remained crowded, and people hurried past without noticing the small dramas in each other's lives. But at one small corner, on one ordinary street, two people learned something extraordinary, that trust, patience, and presence could grow into something stronger than words, something lasting, something quietly powerful. And so, their journey continued. Life would not get easier. Challenges would appear. Distance, misunderstandings, and unexpected obstacles would test them again. But they had discovered a truth. The quiet bond they had nurtured could withstand hardship, grow stronger, and become something unforgettable. And that was only the beginning. Life had already taught them patience. But it was about to test them in ways neither of them expected. The small bond that had grown quietly over ordinary days now faced a challenge that would require courage, honesty, and choices neither of them could ignore. It began slowly. The young man noticed small changes in her mood again. Not as dramatic as before, but subtle. She seemed distracted, quieter than usual, lost in thoughts she didn't share. He felt the familiar unease rising in his chest, the feeling that something was coming that neither of them could control. One evening, while waiting at their usual bus stop, he asked softly, "Is everything okay?" She paused, her eyes distant. I'm not sure," she said quietly. "There are things I need to deal with, and I don't know how to do it." He didn't press. He had learned the hard way that forcing conversation only built walls. Instead, he nodded and said, "I'll be here if you need someone." That was all he could do for now. Presence, support, patience. The days went on, and her distance grew. She began leaving the bus stop earlier than usual, avoiding eye contact and speaking less. He noticed the changes but didn't confront them immediately. He wanted to respect her space, yet his heart felt the ache of uncertainty. One afternoon, he learned that she had been offered a new opportunity, something that required leaving the city temporarily. It was a chance she couldn't ignore, a step toward her future. But it meant time apart, and he felt a fear he hadn't admitted even to himself. When she told him, she avoided looking at him. "I have to go," she said softly. "It's important. I hope you understand." He did understand. He wanted her to succeed, to grow, to take what life offered. But understanding didn't erase the ache. He nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. "I understand, and I'll wait. If you want me to." She looked up then, eyes meeting his for the first time in days. "Thank you," she whispered. The weeks that followed were long and quiet. They communicated through short messages, calls when possible, and occasional emails. It wasn't the same as sharing small daily moments, but it kept the connection alive. Every reply from her made his day. Every message he sent carried unspoken care, hope, and patience. During this time apart, the young man also reflected on his own life. He realized how much he had allowed small routines to control his heart. how much he had underestimated the importance of someone being present in ordinary moments. He began making small changes, reorganizing his schedule, learning to express thoughts more clearly, taking time to notice things beyond himself. Not for anyone else, not yet, but because he wanted to grow, to be ready for whatever lay ahead. She, in her own way, was also learning. The new city was overwhelming, filled with responsibilities and challenges. She often felt lonely, missing the quiet companionship that had become part of her life. She realized how much she valued the young man's presence, not just as a friend, but as someone who truly understood her without needing explanations. After a few weeks, she returned. The city felt different, and so did the bus stop where they had first met. The young man waited as usual, heart beating faster than it had in months. When she appeared, he noticed the tired lines on her face, the small signs of struggle she carried, but also a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. "Welcome back," he said softly, smiling. "Thank you," she replied. Her smile was faint but genuine. For the first time in a long while, she looked at him fully, without avoiding his gaze. They walked together quietly, side by side. No words were necessary. The silence spoke volumes. He had missed her. She had missed him. And now, they had both returned. Not as the same people who had parted weeks ago, but as individuals who had grown in different ways, yet remained connected. It was in the small things that the courage to move forward showed itself. The young man invited her to a quiet cafe, somewhere away from the bus stop, away from routine. They ordered simple drinks, sat across from each other, and let conversation flow naturally. They didn't rush. They didn't force deep confessions. They simply shared stories about work, about challenges, about small victories and losses. At one point, she looked at him and said quietly, "I didn't realize how much I needed someone to believe in me." Just quietly, without expecting anything in return. He nodded, understanding fully. "I think that's how trust grows," he said softly. "Not through words, but through small actions and presence." She smiled then, a little brighter than before. That smile carried relief, hope, and a quiet sense of security. For both of them, it was a turning point. They realized that what they shared was not dependent on constant contact or perfect timing, but on mutual care and patience. Over the following days, they began spending more intentional time together. Not always at the bus stop, not always in the rush of the city. Sometimes they walked through quiet streets. Sometimes they sat in parks. Sometimes they simply talked about nothing at all. The ordinary moments became extraordinary because they were shared with understanding, attention, and care. One evening, as they walked home from a small cafe, she stopped and said quietly, "I'm afraid sometimes. Afraid that life will pull us apart again." He reached for her hand gently, not forcefully, not dramatically, just enough to let her know he was there. "Life might try," he said softly, "but I'm not going anywhere. I'll find a way to stay close, even when it's hard." That small gesture, that simple promise, carried more weight than any words could. In that moment, both of them understood that their connection was no longer fragile. It had faced distance, uncertainty, and fear, and yet it had survived. They began to recognize that love didn't always need to be declared loudly. Sometimes it was in quiet actions, in steady presence, in shared understanding. It was in small gestures, sharing an umbrella in the rain, offering a jacket when it was cold, listening without interrupting, standing silently when words failed. Over time, the young man began to take more brave steps. Not dramatic, not showy, but real and meaningful. He helped her with practical challenges, offered support in ways that respected her independence, and showed through actions that he cared deeply. She responded naturally, not because she had to, but because she trusted him. One rainy afternoon, as they walked through the streets, he noticed her struggling with a heavy bag. Without hesitation, he took it from her and carried it for a while. She protested softly, but he insisted gently. "It's okay. Let me help," he said. Her smile that followed was quiet, shy, and full of gratitude. That small act, ordinary as it seemed, became a symbol of something larger: care, attention, and the willingness to support each other without expectation. Life, of course, continued to challenge them. There were misunderstandings, unexpected problems, moments of doubt. But now, each challenge became an opportunity to strengthen their connection rather than weaken it. They learned to communicate, to express feelings, to listen without judgment, and to be patient even when emotions ran high. One evening, as they sat quietly on a park bench, she looked at him and said, "I feel like I can face almost anything as long as you're here." He smiled, reaching for her hand again. "And I feel the same," he said. "We don't have to have everything figured out. We just have to be here, together, through it all." It was a quiet promise, not bound by words or ceremonies, but deeply understood. And it was enough. In the days that followed, they continued to grow closer. Not because they were perfect, not because life was easy, but because they chose to face it together. Their small acts of courage, care, and attention became the foundation of something real, human, and enduring. The city around them continued in its usual rush. People hurried past, unaware of the quiet story unfolding on the streets, in cafes, and on benches. But those who noticed saw something remarkable: two people building a bond that was patient, resilient, and human. And as the days passed, both of them began to understand that love was not a sudden declaration or a dramatic gesture. It was a choice made repeatedly, quietly, and courageously. It was in being present, in being patient, and trusting the other even when life was uncertain. The young man realized that his care and courage had created space for her to grow and trust him. She realized that her own bravery had allowed her to return, to face challenges, and to accept love without fear. Together, they were learning what it meant to build something real, something human, something lasting. And though the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear: they had crossed the threshold from quiet connection into something deeper. They had taken brave steps, not for show, not for anyone else, but for themselves and for each other. And that was only the beginning. Life had tested them in small ways before, but now it seemed ready to show them the full weight of challenge and the full depth of what they shared. The quiet bond that had grown over ordinary moments was about to prove itself in ways they could never have expected. It started with a misunderstanding. A simple mistake, really, the kind that happens when life gets busy and communication slips. A message misread, a call missed, and suddenly both of them felt distance creeping in again. It wasn't anger. It wasn't betrayal. It was confusion, the kind that makes you question everything quietly inside. Without anyone else knowing, the young man noticed her distance immediately. She no longer laughed softly at his small jokes. Her eyes were restless, distracted. She moved a little faster than usual, avoided small talk, and seemed preoccupied. He didn't want to pressure her, didn't want to assume the worst, but the empty space between them felt heavier than he expected. He tried to reach out, carefully, gently. Short messages, small gestures. He brought her coffee one morning, her favorite kind, and left it at her desk with a simple note. "Thinking of you," she noticed, and a small smile flickered, but it wasn't the same. She replied briefly, almost mechanically. The young woman, meanwhile, felt the weight of misunderstanding, too. She didn't want to upset him. She didn't want to fight, but confusion and fear had built quietly, and now she was unsure of how to bridge the gap. She missed the easy conversations, the small, shared moments, the way he simply understood without explanations. But pride and uncertainty held her back. Days passed like this. Ordinary routines continued, yet an invisible tension had settled between them. The bus stop, the streets, the cafes, they all felt a little emptier. Even when they sat together, the silence no longer carried the comfort it once did. It was a reminder that connection required more than presence. It required courage, honesty, and the willingness to face fear. One evening, the young man decided that enough was enough. He couldn't let misunderstanding grow into something bigger. He needed to speak, to be honest, to take a brave step, even if it meant risking embarrassment or rejection. He found her at their usual cafe, sitting alone, quietly reading. He approached slowly, unsure of her reaction. She looked up, surprised, but didn't move. For a moment, the noise of the cafe, the chatter of strangers, the clinking of cups, all of it faded. It was just the two of them. "I think we need to talk," he said softly. She nodded, hesitant, but motioned for him to sit. They spoke then, not loudly, not dramatically, but honestly. Every word mattered. He explained what he had felt during the misunderstanding, how much the silence had hurt, and how much he valued her presence. She listened, quietly, letting him speak without interruption. Then it was her turn. She shared her own fears, her own confusion, the small moments of doubt that had grown quietly inside her. She admitted that she had missed him more than she realized, and that her hesitation had been about fear, not distance. When their words finally met in understanding, something shifted. The invisible walls that had grown over days of silence began to crumble. Their hands met across the table, lightly, tentatively, but with meaning. Not a grand gesture, but a human one. Real, honest, true. After that evening, everything began to feel lighter. They walked together through quiet streets, talked openly about their fears, their hopes, and their dreams. They laughed softly, sharing small jokes like they used to. But this time, there was a deeper understanding. A knowledge that their connection had survived uncertainty, that it could endure challenges, and that it was real, human, and lasting. One day, as they walked home through the city, he stopped and turned to her. "I've realized something," he said. "Life is unpredictable. We can't control it, but we can choose to face it together. I don't want to let fear or confusion pull us apart again." She looked at him, her eyes softening. "I don't want that either," she whispered. He reached for her hand, gently holding it. "Then let's be brave," he said. "Let's choose each other, every day, even when it's hard." She smiled, the kind of smile that carried relief, joy, and quiet certainty all at once. "Yes," she said simply. From that day forward, their relationship grew stronger. Not because life became easier, but because they faced it together. They learned that love was not about perfection. It was about showing up, being patient, understanding without judgment, and standing together through challenges. They started sharing more of themselves with each other. Small dreams, long-held fears, unspoken thoughts. The young man told her about childhood moments he rarely shared, about mistakes he had made, about hopes he had quietly held. She shared her own stories, the small victories that had gone unnoticed, the struggles that shaped her, the quiet resilience that had carried her through life. Each revelation, each shared moment deepened their bond. They didn't rush to label their feelings, but both knew that what they had was rare, real, human, and that understanding carried more meaning than any words could. Their story began to touch others too. Friends, neighbors, and even casual acquaintances started noticing the quiet way they supported each other, the small acts of care that went unnoticed by most. People began to talk quietly at first, then more openly. "Have you seen them?" Someone would say. "They're always together, but it's different. You can tell they really care." They didn't mind the attention, but it wasn't why they stayed close. They stayed close because they had chosen each other, because they had faced fear and uncertainty together, and because they had discovered that real connection was worth fighting for. One afternoon, as they sat in the park watching children play and the sun warmed the benches, she said quietly, "I never thought something so ordinary could become so important." He looked at her, smiling softly. "Ordinary is what we make of it," he said. "The small moments, the quiet acts, they become extraordinary when they're shared with the right person." She leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. "I'm glad it's you," she said, softly but firmly. He didn't respond with words. He didn't need to. His presence, steady and calm, said everything. And in that moment, surrounded by ordinary life, the laughter of children, the warmth of the sun, the gentle rustle of leaves, they both knew that their love was real. Not perfect, not dramatic, but true, human, and lasting life continued as it always did. But now, every day held meaning. Ordinary routines became shared experiences. Waiting for the bus, walking through crowded streets, sitting quietly in a cafe, all became opportunities to nurture the bond they had fought for. The connection that had survived misunderstanding, distance, and fear. And yet, they never forgot the lessons they had learned. They knew that life could challenge them again, that misunderstandings could arise, that distance and fear could return. But they also knew something stronger, that their love was built on choice, patience, courage, and presence. And that foundation was unshakable. People continued to notice them. Their quiet story, once invisible, became something others spoke about. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was perfect, but because it was real, genuine, human, and in a world filled with noise. That authenticity stood out. One evening, as the sun set and the city glowed in warm colors, he turned to her and said softly, "I think people will always remember this story not because of anything extraordinary we did, but because we stayed, even when it was hard." She smiled, eyes glistening softly. Yes, because it was real. They walked together, hand in hand, through streets that once felt ordinary, but now felt alive with shared memories. Laughter and quiet moments of understanding. Every step was a testament to their journey, to the courage it had taken to be honest, to face fear, and to choose each other. And as night fell, the city around them alive with lights and movement, they both knew that their story, simple, quiet, human, had become something everyone could admire. Not because it was perfect, not because it was easy, but because it was true. Two ordinary people standing together in an extraordinary way, choosing each other every day, caring, understanding, trusting, living slowly and patiently. The kind of love that lasts. And that was the love story everyone would talk about, not because it began with fireworks or dramatic gestures, but because it had grown quietly, courageously, and genuinely into something real and unforgettable. It was ordinary, and that was what made it extraordinary. It was human, and that was what made it eternal. It was their story. Time passed, but their story did not fade. The ordinary city streets, the crowded buses, the small cafes where they had first spoken, all of it became a quiet map of their journey together. Life continued its usual rhythm, but now every day carried a deeper meaning. Every glance, every shared smile, every gentle touch was a reminder that the bond they had nurtured was no longer fragile. It had grown strong, rooted in patience, care, and understanding. They began to notice the little ways life tested them again, but differently this time. It was no longer about misunderstandings or distance, though challenges still appeared. Work grew busier, responsibilities heavier, and sometimes the stress of daily life made them tired and impatient. But unlike before, they faced these moments together. One would notice the other's weariness and offer a quiet word of encouragement, a gentle hand on the shoulder, or a soft smile that said, "I'm here, and it's okay." The young man, for example, had started taking on new responsibilities at work, long hours that left him drained at the end of the day. But whenever he felt the weight pressing down on him, she would be there with a warm drink waiting, a quiet laugh, or a hand that held his in reassurance. She never judged, never nagged. She simply made him feel seen, understood, and supported. He noticed her small victories too. She began tackling challenges she had once avoided, pursuing dreams she had quietly nurtured for years. And each time she succeeded, he celebrated with her, not just through words, but through presence, through gestures, through the quiet acknowledgement that her growth mattered deeply to him. It was in these ordinary yet profoundly human moments that their love deepened. They didn't need grand celebrations or public recognition. Their connection existed in the small things, the shared umbrella in the rain, the simple evening walks, the soft conversations that lasted long into the night. It was the subtle consistency, the daily acts of care, that made their love unshakable. One evening, they found themselves walking through a quiet part of the city, where streetlights painted the streets in soft golden hues. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain from earlier that day. The young woman paused and looked up at him, eyes reflecting a mix of thoughtfulness and vulnerability. "I was thinking," she said softly, "about how much life has changed since we first met. How small moments, ordinary moments, led to this." "To us?" He nodded, smiling gently. "I think that's what makes it real," he said. "Not the big, dramatic moments, but the quiet, patient ones. The ones that happen every day, without anyone noticing." She smiled, leaning lightly on his shoulder. "I used to think life had to be exciting, loud, and perfect to matter. But now I know it's these quiet moments that make life meaningful. And you've shown me that." He held her hand, squeezing it lightly. "And you've shown me the same," he said. "That even in ordinary life, love can be extraordinary if it's real." From that day on, they began to share more intentional experiences. Not flashy or dramatic, but meaningful in a quiet human way. They visited parks in the mornings, sitting on benches watching the world wake up. They cooked meals together, sometimes burning things or making a mess, but laughing at the process. They explored small neighborhoods in the city, discovering tiny cafes, little bookshops, and quiet streets where the noise of life seemed distant. Through it all, their conversations grew deeper. They spoke about childhood memories, unspoken fears, hopes for the future, and the lessons life had quietly taught them. Each story shared strengthened their connection, making it more resilient, more patient, and more understanding. One rainy afternoon, as they sat together in a cafe sipping warm tea, she looked out the window at people hurrying through the rain. "I've been thinking about us," she said softly, "and I realize how much we've grown together, how much we've learned to trust, to care, to support each other." He nodded, smiling. "It hasn't always been easy," he said. "There were times I wasn't sure if we would make it, but every challenge made us stronger. Every small struggle taught us how to be patient and present for each other." She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "I'm grateful," she said quietly, "for everything. For your patience, your care, your presence. I've never felt this way before. I've never felt so seen, so understood, so safe." He looked at her, his heart full. "I feel the same," he said. "You've taught me that love isn't about perfection. It's about being human together. It's about showing up, even when it's hard, and that's something I want to do for the rest of my life." The cafe around them buzzed with life, but for a moment the world fell away. It was just the two of them, connected in a quiet, profound way that only those who had truly understood patience and presence could feel. In the following weeks, they continued to grow closer. Not just as a couple, but as partners in life. They began discussing dreams they had once kept private, goals they had once thought impossible. He encouraged her to pursue her career aspirations with confidence, and she reminded him to take care of his own well-being. Balancing ambition with health and happiness, they also learned the importance of small, consistent gestures. A text in the morning to wish good luck, a warm drink waiting after a long day, simple hand squeeze during a difficult conversation, all of these became their way of saying without words, "I am here. I care. You matter." Life, of course, continued to present challenges. There were moments of tension, disagreements over small things, and days when exhaustion made patience difficult. But they faced each challenge together, learning to listen without judgment, to communicate honestly, and to forgive quickly. Each hurdle they overcame became another layer in the foundation of their relationship. One evening, as they walked home through quiet streets illuminated by streetlights, she paused and looked at him. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked. He nodded, smiling. "All the time," he said. "From the first bus stop to here, it's been a journey. But every step mattered. Every small moment mattered." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they continued walking, side by side, in comfortable silence. It was a silence full of trust, understanding, and love. Their love story began to inspire people around them. Friends noticed the quiet strength of their connection, the way they supported each other without drama or show. Colleagues admired the respect and patience that defined their relationship. And strangers, seeing the small gestures of care, the way he held the umbrella, the way she smiled when he looked at her, felt that love could exist quietly, humanly and genuinely in the midst of ordinary life. One afternoon, while sitting on a park bench watching the sun dip toward the horizon, she said softly, "I think our story is the kind people forget to notice. But those who do notice, they see how real it is. How human. How enduring." He smiled, taking her hand. "It doesn't need to be noticed by everyone," he said. "It only needs to be real between us. And that's all that matters." Over time, their relationship became a quiet example of patience, trust, and love. Not the kind seen in movies or shouted in headlines, but the kind that exists in ordinary life. In shared silences, in daily support, in gentle care. They learned that love wasn't about grand gestures, but about the consistency of presence, the courage to face challenges together, and the willingness to grow together as human beings. Seasons changed. Summers brought warm evenings filled with walks and soft laughter. Winters brought quiet nights with hot drinks and conversations by the window. Spring brought new beginnings, flowers blooming in the parks they often visited, and reminders of growth and patience. Autumn painted the city in orange and gold, a reflection of the warmth they had built together over time. Through it all, they continued to grow as individuals while nurturing their bond. They celebrated successes together and faced setbacks with mutual support. And through every ordinary day, they discovered extraordinary depth in their connection. One evening, sitting together on a quiet balcony overlooking the city, she said softly, "I never imagined that ordinary life could feel so alive, so meaningful. But with you, it does." He turned to her, eyes full of warmth. "I feel the same," he said. "Every ordinary moment with you feels extraordinary because it's shared, because it's real, because it's human." And as night settled over the city, they sat together, hand in hand, hearts full of quiet certainty. They had learned that love was not about perfection, not about dramatic moments, not about being noticed by the world. Love was about being present, being patient, choosing each other every day. It was in that understanding, in that shared presence, that their story reached its quiet peak. Not with fireworks, not with grand announcements, but with human connection, courage, and a bond that had survived misunderstanding, distance, and fear, and the city, with all its noise and rush, seemed to fade away around them. It was just the two of them, together, building a life full of ordinary moments that had become extraordinary. Their love story, once hidden in quiet routines, had grown into something enduring, something inspiring, something human. People who observed it couldn't help but notice, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. And in a world that often overlooks simple truths, that was more remarkable than anything else. They knew challenges would come again. Life would continue to test patience, courage, and understanding. But they had learned the most important lesson, that real love was built on trust, presence, and human connection. And with that foundation, nothing could shake them. And so, hand in hand, heart with heart, they walked into the future. Not hurried, not anxious, not seeking attention. Just two ordinary people living ordinary days, creating extraordinary love, quietly, patiently, and truly human.